Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I think that we're still doing many things. We're working at a time of great difficulties and complexity, yet we do find a common language with all our partners, Italian partners included. As you rightly noted, we have a very good relationship with SACE being one of the most reliable partners we have. And I must say that the project is SACE is one of the clearer projects we have. That is the new stadium for Dinamo, where SACE granted us a guarantee, and this is certainly a good sign. I believe it is only right to highlight that we are going through a very difficult time, very worrisome. It all started in the 90s, I must say, when there was the world was very polarized, and there were a lot of contradiction and conflicts amongst states and groups of states. The cooling down of relationship between Russia and the continent is one of the many signs of the restructuring underway worldwide. Now, shifting from a one-pole world to a multipolar world has a number of repercussions. So artificially stopping this with the ideology and geopolitical instruments is not leading us anywhere. And this includes sanctions as imposed by the US and Europe that carries out its independent foreign policy based on national interests. This is legally illicit and counterproductive, because sanctions do not bring about any solutions, but they further exacerbate it, going against all principles of free competition based on which global economy is built. The political result is that the Russian Federation should forgo its foreign policy, and the historical experience shows that Russia is a large sovereign country, and obviously it tolerates no dictate and sanctions, because this goes against the genetic memory of the Russians. Whenever threatened, the people of Russia gather on the side of the state, supporting it with all its might, and this is exactly what is happening at the moment. It would be most important if the international businesses working in Russia transfer this lesson to their own governments. We know that there are problems for a number of Russian banks, for example, or Russian businesses, but these sanctions actually are creating even greater problems to the West. Losing ground on the market for goods and services and banking systems. The European Union decided on preventing banks from Europe to show what happens within those banks and companies that are subject to the sanctions. It is creating damage to oneself. We won't stop working. As a matter of fact, we will go on working. If you want to keep your client ignorant of what happens, well, I believe that others are going to find some benefit, and whereas the clients of the European banks won't have such information, but we will share such information. And what is the result of such action? Well, this makes me think about a proverb they say in Russia: so to do something bad for my mom, I freeze my ears. I think that this actually is causing more damage to Europe rather than to the ones that the measures were adopted against. the overall losses for the European economy account to some $100 billion after the imposing of the sanctions, with a loss gain of some $20 million. The European labor market can lose some 2.5 million jobs. Well, I think this is not the case. There's a very high unemployment within the EU, and one of the countries that has more to lose is indeed Italy, losing some 16 billion euro and losing some 300,000 jobs. I believe that in the political circles and in the business circles, they are learning that there's no need and no meaning in imposing sanction, and it is the Italian Prime Minister that got to that, Mr. Renzi. Indeed, Mr. Renzi said that he meant to revise sanctions altogether. We're very grateful to Italian businessmen and politicians who are talking against these sanctions and for constructive dialogue with the Russian Federation. I'm very pleased that we are given the opportunity to talk about that today so that we can exchange ideas on that and listen to one another. We all know that sanctions are just but a temporary measure that are bound to be abolished. The business committee should get ready and work on it. As a matter of fact, we should work as soon as possible for the cancellation of the sanctions so as to reduce the damages caused to a minimum in terms of economy and in terms of integration of Russia with the West. This notwithstanding, Russia still attracts a lot of investments. Russia has small indebtedness, has a wide international reserves, and this makes a distinction between it and the other developed and developing countries. Indeed, Russia is pretty unique from this point of view. Our GDP grew by some 0.3%. Between August and September. Import grew by some 4%, and in terms of high-tech, the growth was of 7.8%. This leads us to adopt some optimistic views. So despite all the economic problems in existence, Russia did its best to improve the investment environment. Indeed, we saw an increase in the world rating worldwide. Russia gained 8th position, or improved by 8th position in the world ranking in terms of competitiveness, which is part of the top 50. Indeed, Russia is one of the most competitive countries. It ranks 45 out of the top 50. And this is made easier by the establishment of the Eurasian Economic Union and no integration in the post-Sovietic area. The agreement between the 5 countries make up a market of 185 million inhabitants, including Belarus, Kazakhstan, Russia, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan. Thanks to the doing away with custom barriers, we also create the possibility to establish links between Europe and Eurasian Economic Union. So we basically have another counterpart for our foreign partners and for Europe amongst them. This creates also a great advantage for European investors because we are certainly going to prefer those companies that are seeing an increase in their business and the business relations towards East. So the establishment of the Eurasian Economic Union is not a political entity, it is just an economic entity to promote integration worldwide. This institution works with other similar institutions in Asia and elsewhere, thus creating an harmonious community encompassing everything between Lisbon and Vladivostok. What we aim to is the establishment of an Asiatic common market. It is a very far-reaching project, showing that even at such difficult time, the process of economic integration go on and remain the key driver for sustainable development of the continent. Let me remind once again that the tensions in the political environment is not stable conditions, but rather a dynamic condition. So rather than being on opposite sides, we're going to see sanctions cancelled with full cooperation established. We don't have to bear the brunt for that. Verona has given to the world the example of discontinuation of hatred between Montecchi and Capuletti, and this is what makes us feel so importantly. We understand that there's no point in having opposition where there are no winners but just losers. So I believe that to find a solution to the most complex and urgent problems connected to the relationships in the Euroasiatic continent, we have to use all our wisdom. Thank you.